Tell me why a husband needs a vote in a house his wife already knows how to run. I believed men were made to be useful, and the best ones were happiest serving the women who gave their lives direction. That was not cruelty to me. It was balance after generations of women carrying trays for men who never thanked them. So at the dinner that would decide whether my friends saw me as a leader, I put my husband in an apron, rang for him, and used my foot when he stopped obeying. He only pressed his thumb against the chipped corner of the blue tray and gave me that patient little smile, which I took as surrender. Before dessert, I was certain every woman at my table understood exactly who had the voice in my marriage. My name is Paloma Reed. I was 39 and worked as a route planning supervisor for the Regional Transit Authority. On paper, I moved buses. In practice, I decided which problem could delay 500 people and which problem had to be removed from the road. The control room had 12 screens and 4 dispatchers, but one final voice. Mine. A bus could not turn 2 ways because people had equal feelings. Someone chose. Everyone moved. That was the practical version of leadership. I was reviewing a storm detour when Nadia Rahman sent me the application for chair of the North River Learning Fund. It paid for evening classes and trade certificates. The position was unpaid, but being chosen by women who ran companies, clinics, and schools meant I would set direction instead of repairing delays. At home, Evan found me working in the living room. He carried soup on a blue enamel tray with one chipped corner. At 41, he managed facilities at a community college and stayed calm when boilers failed. We had bought that tray during our first year together. I attended night classes, and Evan often met me on our apartment stairs with dinner. One night he carried food, my bag, and a broken umbrella. I took the tray from him and said marriage could not mean one person carrying everything. For years we alternated Sunday breakfast and called the tray our turn. My father never carried a tray. He sat while my mother, Rosa, moved between the stove and his chair. If she disagreed, he treated her opinion as ingratitude. I watched her become quiet first at dinner, then everywhere. At 16, I promised no man would train me into that silence. Evan knew the story. That was why I valued his usefulness. He often served instead of speaking. When Rosa entered rehabilitation after a fall, he arranged rides, installed a rail, and delivered meals. I counted 11 tasks in 6 days. None felt like comfort. The application asked for volunteer hours. Our household had contributed 146. I attended 11 planning sessions. Evan repaired shelves, drove students, replaced heaters, and designed a pickup route. None of it would have happened if I had not brought him into the fund. I entered 146 beside household leadership. Evan read the line. He pressed his thumb against the chipped corner of the tray and asked whether the form showed who performed the work. I explained that leadership meant making sure work happened. A supervisor did not drive every bus. He pointed out that a supervisor did not claim to be the driver. I reminded him that becoming chair would bring more money into the fund. He always said the work mattered more than recognition. After a moment, he signed the household verification line. Then he photographed the page. Evan kept records of everything. Furnace filters, tire rotations, my mother's appointments. I took the photograph as another little system meant to make him feel safe. He touched the white chip once more and carried the empty tray away. By 9, the application was finished. 146 hours, 3 years of service, 6 committee members who knew my name. The route was set. Nadia invited the leadership committee to the Riverside Cafe the following Saturday. There were 5 of us around the patio table. Nadia, Brooke Jensen, Leah Chen, Simone Alvarez, and me. Evan was helping at the fund's storage room across town. Brooke had known me since we were 13. She had eaten at my parents' table and seen my mother stand through entire meals. Whenever I became too soft with a man, Brooke reminded me where softness had taken Rosa. Nadia was different. Her approval felt earned. She had built the Learning Fund after leaving a consulting firm that treated charity as a photograph beside a large check. She liked decisive people. She also liked testing them. She placed my application beside her coffee and said the next chair would need to control donors, volunteers, and a board with 7 strong opinions. Then she tapped the line with 146 hours. She asked whether I had worked those hours myself. I said they belonged to my household. Leah asked how many were mine. I told her household labor did not become less valuable because a husband carried it out. I had recruited Evan, organized our calendar, and directed the priorities. That was the practical version. Brooke laughed and said Evan was the most disciplined husband she knew. Simone smiled, but Leah kept her eyes on the application. Nadia asked what discipline meant inside my home. I explained that Evan and I did not waste time pretending every choice required a debate. I managed schedules and social decisions. He handled practical work. Men liked useful tasks because tasks had edges. Women had spent generations carrying the invisible part, so I saw no injustice in a man carrying more of the visible part now. Brooke added that Evan even brought my coffee when we played cards. She made a small motion with 2 fingers as if ringing a bell. The women laughed. I counted 3 full laughs and 1 polite smile. Leah gave neither. Nadia leaned back and studied me. She said the final chair vote could happen at my house in 2 weeks. If I believed leadership began at home, I could host the supper without lifting a finger. The challenge was playful, but the offer beneath it was serious. She wanted to see whether I could design a room and make it move. I accepted before the server returned. On the drive to the storage building, Brooke called it perfect. She said too many women claimed equality and then apologized whenever a husband looked tired. A visible example would make my argument impossible to dismiss. I told her Evan would enjoy it. Service was how he showed love. That sentence contained enough truth to sound complete. The North River storage room occupied the back half of an old print shop. Metal shelves held donated laptops, folding tables, winter coats, and boxes of workbooks. When Brooke and I arrived, Evan was on a ladder securing a loose light above the loading door. Simone stood below him holding screws. She thanked him for building the lower shelves where she could reach supplies without asking for help. Evan told her the old layout had been badly planned. I corrected the tone by saying he meant that I had noticed the access problem and sent the right person. Simone looked from me to Evan. Then she thanked both of us. There were 8 shelves, 2 repaired carts, and 1 new ramp. Evan had worked on all of them. I did not understand why names mattered when everyone received what they needed. Nadia entered with Leah a few minutes later. She carried a blue folder and asked Evan whether he had a moment to confirm the transport numbers. Evan climbed down. Before answering, he rested one hand on the old blue tray sitting beside a box of mugs. I had brought it months earlier for volunteer coffee, and he pressed his thumb to the chipped corner. He said he had already answered Nadia's private question and could send the dates again if necessary. I assumed they were discussing fuel receipts. The fund had strict rules about reimbursements. Nadia said dates would be useful. Leah wrote something in her notebook. Brooke nudged me and asked whether Evan would wear a uniform for the supper. I said a black apron would be enough. Brooke suggested a service bell. Evan heard her. His face did not change, but his thumb remained on the white chip. He asked whether the dinner was for my friends or whether it was a test he had not agreed to take. I told him Nadia wanted to see how I managed an event. He was turning a harmless theme into a question about respect. He named the exact problem. He said the shuttle route on my application had taken him 4 weekends to design. I had changed the cover page and accepted Nadia's praise without correcting her. I reminded him that I had found the grant paying for the shuttle. He answered that both facts could exist under both names. That was Evan's weakness. He could reduce a marriage to 2 columns and believe accuracy had solved the feeling underneath. My father had erased my mother. Evan feared one missing credit line as if the 2 things belonged in the same moral category. I said the application represented us as a household. If I became chair, both of us benefited. He asked how he benefited from being displayed as a trained man. I told him no one had used that word. Brooke had used disciplined. I had used useful. The difference mattered. Evan looked toward Nadia, who was still speaking with Leah near the loading door. He told me he had answered every question she asked, including who worked each hour. I heard resentment, not warning. A husband who truly supported his wife would not make 146 small cuts in her chance to lead. On Monday, I sent the supper plan to the committee. 6 courses were unnecessary, so I chose 3. 5 guests. 1 host. 1 man handling service. I assigned Evan 14 tasks in half-hour blocks and placed them in our shared calendar. He did not accept the calendar invitation. I accepted it for him from the tablet in our living room. We had always shared the device. A marriage could not run if every routine action required permission. That evening, Brooke asked whether Evan was excited. I said he had already started planning equipment and transport for Nadia. I left out the shuttle argument. I needed Brooke's laughter when the other women saw how smoothly my home moved. 3 days later, she arrived with a small brass bell from an antique shop. Its click was dry and sharp. Evan looked at it, then at me. I rang it once. He did not move. I rang it again and asked for coffee. He brought the cup after a pause. Brooke applauded. I counted 2 seconds before Evan set it down. 2 seconds was not rebellion. It was adjustment. The roots still belonged to me. The first public test happened at the Adult Learning Centre on Thursday night. We were preparing welcome packets for the new class, and I offered to provide coffee and food. The committee expected paper cups and store-bought sandwiches. I brought the blue tray, the black apron, and Brooke's brass bell. Evan arrived from the community college at 6. Dust marked one knee of his work pants. He had spent the afternoon repairing a classroom door, and I told him to change in the restroom before the others arrived. He looked at the apron folded over my arm. Then he pressed his thumb to the tray's chipped corner. He asked why serving coffee required a costume. I said the apron protected his clothes and made the evening feel organized. That was the practical version. He asked about the bell. I told him Brooke had brought it as a joke. A secure man could survive a joke. Evan could have refused. He put on the apron instead. That choice mattered to me. People later treated him as if he had no agency, but he tied the straps with his own hands. Nadia arrived first. She saw Evan arranging cups on the blue tray and smiled. Brooke came behind her and rang the bell before taking off her coat. Evan brought her water. Leah and Simone entered together. Leah stopped when she saw the apron. Simone greeted Evan by name and asked about the new ramp rail. I answered that it was finished. Evan added that the final inspection was Monday. I told the room he liked details because they kept him busy. Nadia laughed. Brooke laughed louder. I counted 4 women watching, which mattered more than the 2 who did not join in. For the first hour, the system worked. I sorted packets with Nadia and directed Evan with the bell. Coffee. Napkins. More tape. Empty plates. A chair for Simone. He moved through the room without complaint. Nadia said I had created an efficient household. I said men were easier to love when they knew where to be useful. Brooke called Evan my best-trained volunteer. Evan placed a bowl of fruit on the table. He asked whether I agreed with that description. I told him it was praise. Training produced competence. No one insulted a pilot by saying she had been trained. Leah looked up from the committee packets. She asked Evan who had designed the evening student shuttle route. I said our household had. Leah repeated the question to Evan. His thumb moved to the white chip. He gave the dates of 3 planning Saturdays, named the transit data I had provided, and explained that he had mapped the stops, tested the travel times, and adjusted the route after 2 students missed connections. He credited me with obtaining the grant and nothing else. The answer was accurate in the narrow way Evan preferred. It was also unnecessary. I told Leah that he could turn a sandwich order into a project report if no one stopped him. No one laughed this time. I rang the bell and asked him to clear the cups. He cleared them. The dry click restored the shape of the room. 1 instruction. 1 response. No confusion. Near 8, Brooke knocked a cup from the edge of the table. Coffee spread across the tile. She apologized and reached for paper towels. I rang the bell before she stood. Evan had been carrying a plate of sandwiches. I told him to put it down, kneel, and clean the floor. He asked Brooke whether she was hurt. I repeated the instruction. The room became quiet enough for me to hear the old wall clock. Evan placed the plate on the blue tray. Then he knelt and wiped the coffee. Brooke made a joke about full service, but her voice had lost its easy shape. Nadia returned to the packet list. Simone moved her chair so Evan had more space. I saw discomfort and interpreted it as the natural resistance people feel when someone demonstrates an unfamiliar kind of marriage. Women had watched men receive service for centuries without asking whether the floor hurt the woman kneeling on it. One man used paper towels for 30 seconds, and suddenly everyone needed a moral meeting. When the floor was dry, Evan carried the towels to the trash. He did not return to the table. I found him in the narrow hall beside the supply closet. He had removed the apron and folded it into a square. He asked whether this was how I wanted the committee to remember our marriage. I told him the committee would remember that I could organize people and that my husband supported my work. He said support was not the same as obedience. I reminded him that he obeyed fire codes, work orders, and maintenance schedules every day without losing dignity. He said those systems did not laugh when he knelt. That sentence reached somewhere I did not want him to touch. His face was not angry. It was tired. For one beat, I saw the man who had waited on our first apartment stairs with soup growing cold because my class ran late. I could have taken the folded apron from him. I could have returned to the room and said the joke had become ugly. Instead, I told him he was confusing temporary discomfort with disrespect because he was not used to women holding visible authority. He looked at the blue tray through the open classroom door. His thumb pressed against his empty palm where the chipped corner would have been. Then he asked whether my authority required him to become smaller. I said my authority required him not to make every request about his pride. He returned to the room without the apron. I let that small rebellion pass. There were still 7 tasks left, but the important work was finished. In the car, Brooke stared through the windshield before starting the engine. She said the kneeling part had looked harsher than it sounded in my plan. I reminded her of my mother standing through dinner. Brooke's hands tightened on the wheel. She had no answer to Rosa. Nobody did. Finally, she said perhaps public proof was necessary because private kindness had never protected women like my mother. That was why Brooke enabled me. She did not enjoy hurting Evan. She feared what would happen if I stopped controlling the route. By the time she dropped me home, we had improved the plan. Evan would wear the apron only during service. No kneeling unless something genuinely fell. The bell would be used sparingly. 4 rings at most. Compromise did not require surrender. It required better timing. Inside, the blue tray sat on the living room floor. Evan had cleaned it. The enamel shone except for the old white chip. I picked up the brass bell and set it in the center. The tray no longer looked like our turn. It looked like proof. The supper was 9 days away. I treated the classroom problem as a failed rehearsal. On Saturday, I printed Evan's service plan. 14 tasks, from wine at 6:45 to dessert after Nadia announced the next chair. I placed the pages beside the washing machine because Evan kept his work shirts there. The black apron lay on top. I added one note asking him to wear a white shirt beneath it. A clean uniform would show that the classroom night had been a rough draft. Evan entered the laundry room and placed my application on the machine. Beneath it were his sign-in sheets, shuttle plan, receipts, and storage schedule. He had separated the year into 5 projects and credited my 11 meetings, 6 donor calls, and grant application. I counted the pages. 9. He pressed his thumb against the chipped corner of the blue tray, which he had carried in with the papers. Then he said the problem was no longer one line on one form. I asked why the tray was needed for a paperwork discussion. He said he had been using it to carry my work downstairs for years. The sentence was dramatic, but the stack in front of him was not. He described the pattern. I accepted praise for the shuttle route, called the shelves my leadership, and described his student rides as household service. When he asked for his name, I called him insecure. I answered that marriage joined effort. We did not send invoices after every kind act. He said kindness stopped being shared when one person used it to qualify for authority over others. That was Evan's practical version: names, hours, ownership. He did not understand what it cost me to ask Nadia for a place at her table. She rewarded proof, not need. I told him I had spent years making his work visible. Without me, the fund would know him only as the man who repaired a heater. He said the students knew him as the man who made the night bus arrive before their last connection. Simone knew him as the man who lowered the shelves. Leah knew who measured the route. He did not need my title for those facts to exist. His calmness angered me more than shouting. My father had used volume. Evan used accuracy. Both made my emotional truth feel like a mess awaiting correction. I asked where that accuracy had been when my mother fell. For the first time that morning, his hands stopped moving. I reminded him that beside Rosa's hospital bed, I told him I was afraid. He opened his phone and discussed rehabilitation transport. I asked whether she would walk again. He measured her bathroom for a rail. Tasks let him leave without admitting he did not know how to hold me. Evan did not deny it. He had believed each solution would give me space to breathe. When fear remained, he found another task. By the time he understood that I wanted presence, I was using his service as proof that command worked. He admitted withdrawing when I became sharp. Facts felt safer than giving me words I might repeat to Brooke as another joke. For several seconds, neither of us touched the papers. There was my grievance. Evan had left emotionally before leaving any room. He still cooked, drove, repaired, and scheduled, while his voice moved somewhere I could not reach. I almost removed the apron from the washing machine. Then he gave me terms. Correct the 146 hours. Remove the bell. Tell Nadia the classroom display went too far. If I did those things, he would host beside me, not beneath me. He had turned an apology into a work order. I said he was using support as leverage when my position depended on it. He answered that support was freely given. Obedience was extracted. He touched the tray's chip. Then he said the dinner could still be ours if I chose partnership before the guests arrived. I said I would consider it. That afternoon, I visited Rosa in the rehabilitation courtyard. She lifted one foot onto an exercise block. I wanted to help, but her therapist had told me not to touch her unless asked. A woman who once helped before anyone asked now needed others to respect her effort. I described the nomination and supper, making the apron sound playful and the bell ceremonial. The evening would show that a husband could serve without a wife becoming invisible. Rosa rested after 3 lifts. She asked whether Evan wanted to be displayed that way. I said he had agreed to serve. She asked whether agreement made under public pressure still felt like a choice. I reminded her that she carried plates for 30 years without anyone protecting her dignity. Evan had 1 tray for 1 evening. Rosa looked toward the courtyard door. She said being ordered by a woman would not have made my father's contempt kinder. Changing the person in the chair did not change what contempt did to the person standing. I counted 5 seconds. Then I said she was comparing her whole marriage with a themed supper. Evan had money, work, friends, and a voice. 1 apron could not erase him. Rosa said a person could have a voice and still learn that speaking cost too much. The comment sounded borrowed from Evan. I ended the visit early because she needed rest. That was the practical version. In the parking lot, Nadia asked whether the domestic resistance was solved. A chair could not retreat whenever one volunteer disliked a plan. Nadia's wording placed Evan where I needed him, volunteer, not judge. Brooke hesitated but agreed the dinner should continue with no kneeling and less bell. I accepted half of that. At home, I moved the brass bell from the tray to the dining room shelf. I left the apron where it was. Evan stood in the doorway while I revised the service schedule. I told him the 146 hours would remain under household leadership because changing them before a vote would make me look dishonest. After I became chair, I would ask Leah to add a note crediting him. He asked whether I heard the order inside that promise. First, I received the title. Then he might receive his name. I said timing was not theft. He placed his thumb on the white chip. His hand was steady. He said he would be present at the supper because the people voting should see the arrangement clearly. He would not discuss it privately again. I heard agreement. Maybe not warm agreement, but adult agreement. He had named his complaint. I had adjusted what was reasonable. The final route still required one controller. I printed the new schedule. 13 tasks, 4 rings, 5 witnesses, 1 vote. Nothing about that plan looked cruel. The dinner began Friday at 6:30. I wore a dark green dress and Nadia's gold committee pin. Evan wore a white shirt, black trousers, and the apron. He had set the table for 6 women. Nadia sat at my right. Leah sat across from me with the committee packets beside her plate. Simone and another volunteer, Janine, took the middle seats. Brooke sat nearest the hall. 5 witnesses. 1 husband. 1 decision. The blue tray rested on the sideboard with 6 glasses. The brass bell stood beside my hand. Evan served the first course without being called. He had chosen the soup Rosa used to make when I was young. That detail pleased me. Even after the laundry room argument, he understood that support could be expressed through work. I told the table he had cooked everything himself. Nadia asked whether I had helped choose the menu. I said I had approved it. Brooke looked down at her soup. At 6:52, I rang for wine. Evan filled the glasses. At 7:10, I rang because Janine needed another napkin. At 7:26, I rang because Nadia's chair was too close to the vent. Evan moved it without comment. 3 rings. I had promised 4. The room functioned. Plates arrived. Empty dishes left. Conversation returned to the fund, and Nadia asked how I would handle volunteers who challenged a decision after it had been made. I said clarity prevented most challenges. People became difficult when leaders pretended every opinion carried the same weight. Leah asked whether that rule applied inside a marriage. I said especially inside a marriage. 2 people could discuss a route, but they could not both hold the wheel. Simone asked where Evan sat in that system. I told her Evan preferred practical roles. He liked being useful. Some men became loud because they had no purpose. Mine became peaceful when I gave him one. Evan entered carrying the main course on the blue tray. His thumb rested beside the white chip. Nadia watched it. She asked whether the display was still a joke. I heard a test. Leaders fail tests when they apologize for their own design. I said the apron was playful, but the principle was serious. Women had served men for generations. They had cooked, cleaned, carried, and disappeared. Balance would not arrive because men washed 1 cup and expected praise. Men were made to be useful. A good husband should serve the woman who gave his life direction. No one interrupted. Silence can be agreement when people are hearing a difficult truth for the first time. That was the practical version. I continued. I said a husband did not need a vote on every household choice when a competent wife had already decided. A voice was not the same as a veto. Evan had food, work, comfort, and respect. Carrying a tray did not oppress him. Evan set the main dish on the table. He asked whether that was how I wanted my belief remembered. I said yes. Brooke shifted in her chair. The guest badge clipped to her blouse caught the light. Nadia asked whether Evan agreed to be my leadership example. I said he agreed to serve that evening. Evan said agreement to a task was not agreement to the story I placed around it. I rang the bell for the 4th time. He remained beside the sideboard. A napkin had fallen near my chair. I pointed to it and asked him to pick it up before bringing the vegetables. Both his hands held the blue tray. He asked me to pick up the napkin myself. The refusal was small. The room made it large. I could see all 5 women. Nadia's face had closed. Leah held 1 page halfway out of her packet. Simone had stopped eating. Janine stared at the bell. Brooke would not look at me. Public authority survives only if a public instruction has a result. I repeated the order. Evan did not move. I pushed my chair back, reached beneath the tray with my foot, and kicked the back of his calf. Hard. Not hard enough to injure him. Hard enough to force 1 step forward. The tray tilted. 1 serving spoon struck the rim. The sound was thin and bright. Evan caught the weight. He did not shout. He did not touch me. He placed his thumb against the chipped white corner and gave me a small, patient smile. Then he asked whether I wanted the committee to remember my statement exactly as I had made it. I said they should remember all of it. A single kick did not erase 12 years of marriage. It corrected open disrespect at my own table. I reached for Brooke's laugh. Brooke looked at the floor. Evan lowered the tray to the sideboard. He gave me one final choice in front of everyone. I could apologize for using my foot. I could state that the 146 hours belonged to the people who worked them. I could tell the table he was my husband, not my servant. If I did those things, he would sit down and finish the evening as an equal. His offer made refusal look ugly. I told him the truth he could not avoid. For months, he watched our marriage fail and answered with records. He let silence fight for him. He waited for dates, forms, and witnesses because he feared a private confrontation that might still have saved us. Evan's smile disappeared. He admitted that part. He said his silence had become cowardice. At first, he avoided conflict because he loved me. Later, he avoided it because he no longer trusted either of us inside it. He should have spoken sooner and left sooner. For 1 second, the room belonged to neither of us. Then he said his failure to speak did not make my choice his responsibility. I told him not to hide control inside an apology. I had reduced the bell, removed kneeling, and credited his cooking. He kept moving the standard because he did not want me to win. He asked once more whether I would correct the record. I told him to bring dessert. Evan touched the white chip. The patient smile returned, but it was different now. I read it as acceptance. He understood that the evening would continue with or without his approval. He set down the blue tray. Then he untied the apron, folded it once, and placed it beside the brass bell. Brooke removed her guest badge. She set it on the edge of the tray and followed Evan toward the front hall. She did not make a speech. She did not look back. I remained at the head of the table. There were 4 committee women left, 4 clean dessert plates, and 1 decision that mattered. Evan had finally stopped turning every feeling into another task. Brooke had chosen drama over loyalty. Neither fact changed the vote. I lifted my glass and told Nadia the demonstration was finished. The women had seen who kept control when a man tried to disrupt the room. Now they could choose their chair. Nadia did not call the vote. Evan stood in the open front hall with one hand on the door. Brooke had already stepped outside. The patient smile remained for one more breath. His thumb moved against his palm, tracing the shape of the tray's missing chip. Nadia asked me who had worked the 146 hours. I gave the same answer. Our household. She opened her committee packet. The first page was the photograph Evan had taken in our living room. My application line was visible. So was his signature beneath it. Behind the photograph were the 5 project sheets from the laundry room, the storage shelves, the heaters, the student rides, the shuttle route, the accessibility changes. Each page carried dates and individual names. Nothing on those pages was new. That was what made them difficult to dismiss. I had seen each fact alone and controlled its meaning. Nadia had placed them in one order. Leah explained that she had asked Evan, who designed the shuttle, because Nadia questioned the application total. Simone had confirmed the shelves and access work. Janine had checked the student rides. Evan had answered every private question with the same division he showed me beside the washing machine. He had not told them I was cruel. He had not asked them to save him. He had only stopped allowing my version to stand unanswered. That was his hidden strength and his ugliest flaw in the same shape. Evan could turn pain into a clean record. He could also let a record speak where a husband should have spoken months earlier. Nadia said the committee entered dinner knowing my application needed correction. She continued because she wanted to see whether I would give credit without force. Her voice became smaller. She had enjoyed my jokes until their cost stood in an apron, testing me with another person's dignity instead of stopping me at the classroom. The kick ended her test. Nadia withdrew my nomination. Leah marked the decision in the minutes. Simone removed my name from the next volunteer schedule. Janine closed the dessert box she had brought and carried it to the door. 5 women had arrived as my circle. 4 left as witnesses. Brooke was already gone. I asked Evan whether this was his plan. He had not planned the kick. He made one correction and answered questions. He stayed because I called his obedience proof of leadership, and the voters deserved to see what that meant inside our home. Then he looked at the blue tray. The white chip came from our first apartment stairwell, where I took the tray from him and said love meant taking turns. Each time he touched it, he had searched for that woman. At the classroom, he had almost left. In the laundry room, he had offered the last private exit. Beside my table, after my foot struck his leg, he stopped searching. He was not a saint. He had hidden inside usefulness until silence became punishment and records felt safer than grief. But he would not stay after I treated him as property before people whose respect I wanted. He stepped outside. The door closed without force. That was the practical version. The route I claimed to control had ended at our front door. Consequences arrived in ordinary pieces. Nadia sent the corrected report with Evan's name. Thursday dinners continued without me. Rosa refused to call the kick justice. Appointments vanished from our calendar, the bathroom handle stayed loose, and no meal crossed the living room on Sunday morning. 2 weeks later, Evan's attorney sent a divorce petition in one plain envelope. I kept the brass bell in a drawer. It never sounded powerful again. The blue tray remained on the dining room floor beside Brooke's badge. I walked around it for 3 days. I could have lifted it at any time, but picking it up would have meant admitting that it had never proved a man belonged beneath me. It had only marked whose turn I refused to take.